The wreckage floated in silence, broken metal spinning slowly against the backdrop of dead stars. No distress signals came from the shattered research station. No life signs registered on any scanner. The salvage crew from the Confederation had seen abandoned facilities before, but this one felt different. Something about the sterile white corridors and the rows upon rows of empty containment cells made even the most experienced salvagers uncomfortable. Ren pulled himself through the airlock, his suit lights cutting through the darkness. He was the crew's tech specialist, young for this kind of work but good at finding valuable data cores and wreckage. Behind him came two others, their movements careful in the zero gravity. They had 3 hours before their ship needed to move on. 3 hours to strip anything useful from this floating tomb. The walls were marked with symbols none of them recognized. Ren ran his gloved hand across strange inscriptions, feeling the grooves through his suit. His scanner identified the metal as something not found in Confederation space. This station belonged to the architects, those pale beings who rarely spoke to other species and kept to the far edges of known territory. What were they doing out here, so far from their usual routes? The containment wing told part of the story. Biological waste filled several chambers. DNA samples from a dozen different species lined the shelves, all carefully labeled in a language Ren's translator struggled to decode. This wasn't a research station. It was a laboratory and not the legal kind. The Confederation had strict laws about genetic experiments, especially involving sapient species. The architects had broken every single one. Ren's scanner picked up traces of human DNA in one of the larger containment units. That made him stop cold. Humans were rare in this sector, their homeworld thousands of light years away. Finding human genetic material here meant either incredible coincidence or something much darker. He checked the logs, finding fragmented records of 27 test subjects. 26 were listed as terminated. The 27th entry was corrupted, only showing a date and a single word: jettisoned. He reported the finding to his captain, knowing this changed everything. The Confederation took human trafficking seriously. This wasn't just salvage anymore. This was evidence of a crime. Their ship would need to report this to the nearest outpost, and investigators would come. The architects who ran this station would face justice if they could be found. What Ren and his crew never discovered was the escape pod. It had launched 8 months earlier, triggered by an automated safety protocol when the station's power core began to fail. Inside the pod was the 27th subject, a human infant deemed unsuitable for further testing. The architects had planned to dispose of the child properly, but chaos during the station's evacuation left that task incomplete. The pod's navigation system picked a random trajectory, sending it away from the dying station at maximum speed. The pod traveled for 6 weeks before its fuel ran dry. Momentum carried it further, through an unmapped asteroid field past the outer planets of a yellow star system, until gravity finally caught it. The pod's heat shield activated as it hit atmosphere, turning the small craft into a burning meteor that streaked across an alien sky. Drakmore's surface was unforgiving. Volcanic mountains jutted up from plains of hardened lava. The air was thick with sulfur and ash. No Confederation survey team had ever landed here, deterred by the hostile environment and the massive heat signatures that moved across the surface. The planet was marked in red on every star chart. Forbidden territory, do not approach, extreme danger. The pod crashed into the side of a volcanic peak, embedding itself in still warm rock. Its hull cracked on impact, systems failing one by one. Inside, the infant began to cry, a thin wail that should have been lost in the howling wind. Should have been, but wasn't. Ashira heard the sound from 3 valleys away. Her hearing was sharp, honed by millions of years of evolution that made her species the apex of apex predators. She was large even for her kind, her scales the color of polished silver, her wings capable of carrying her across entire continents. She had lived for 3 centuries and seen much, but never had she heard a sound quite like this. Other dragons heard it too. They came from their caves and hunting grounds, curious about the strange crying that echoed across their territory. 12 of them gathered around the crashed pod, their massive forms circling the broken metal. Steam rose from their nostrils. Their eyes, intelligent despite what Confederation scientists would have believed, studied the wreckage with interest. Ashira was the one who broke the pod open. Her claws, each as long as a human forearm, carefully peeled back the damaged hull. The crying grew louder. Inside, wrapped in torn thermal blankets, was something none of them had seen before. It was tiny, barely the size of a Shira's smallest claw. It had no scales, no wings, no natural weapons at all. Its skin was soft and pink, completely unsuited for Drakmore's harsh environment. The infant looked up at Ashira with wide eyes and stopped crying. In that moment, something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or simply the universal understanding between a helpless creature and one who could choose to help or harm. Ashira made her choice. She lifted the infant gently, cradling it against the softer scales of her chest where her body heat was most controlled. The other dragons rumbled their confusion. This was not prey. It was too small, too different. But it was also alive, and Ashira had claimed it. In dragon culture, such claims were sacred. What one dragon protected, all the clan would defend. They had no word for adoption in their language, no concept that matched what was happening. They simply accepted that this strange, scaleless creature was now part of their family. Ashira carried the infant back to her cave, high in the volcanic peaks where the wind was slightly cooler. She had raised hatchlings before, though never one so different from herself. This would be a challenge. But dragons did not shy from challenges. The infant would need food, warmth, protection. These things Ashira could provide. As the human child settled into sleep against her scales, Ashira looked out across Drakmore's harsh landscape. She did not know where this creature came from or why it had fallen from the sky. She did not know it was called human, or that its species had built civilizations across distant stars. She only knew that it was small, alone, and now hers to raise. The stars above held no answers, only the endless questions that would shape both their futures. 10 summers had passed since the sky brought the strange child to Drakmore. Kai moved through the volcanic valleys with confidence now, his bare feet finding purchase on rocks that would burn most creatures. His skin had darkened under the harsh sun, toughened by years of exposure to elements that should have killed him long ago. He was small compared to his family, barely reaching the height of Ashira's foreleg. But he had learned to survive in ways the dragons never expected. The hunting ground stretched before him, a vast plain of cooled lava dotted with thermal vents. Kai crouched low, watching a herd of 6-legged grazers moving between the steam clouds. These creatures were his prey, though he could not kill them the way his family did. He had no fire, no claws, no natural weapons at all. What he had was something the dragons were only beginning to understand: the ability to think beyond instinct. In his hand was a spear, carefully crafted from volcanic rock and bone. It had taken him months to figure out how to bind the sharp stone to the shaft using dried sinew. The dragons watched his first attempts with confusion. Why make something when you already have what you need? But Kai did not have claws or fangs. He had hands that could shape the world around him, and a mind that refused to accept limitations. He threw the spear with practiced accuracy. It sailed through the hot air and struck true, bringing down one of the grazers. The herd scattered, disappearing into the maze of rock formations. Kai ran forward to claim his kill, knowing he had only minutes before other predators caught the scent. He worked quickly, using a sharp stone to cut away the best meat. The rest he would leave for scavengers. This was another thing the dragons found strange. They ate everything, bones and all, but Kai could not. His teeth were flat, his stomach weak compared to theirs. He had to be selective. A shadow passed overhead. Kai looked up to see Ashira descending, her silver scales gleaming in the sunlight. She landed nearby, the impact sending small rocks skittering across the ground. She rumbled a greeting, the deep sound vibrating in Kai's chest. He had learned to understand these sounds, to hear the difference between question and statement, approval and concern. He rumbled back, his human throat unable to match the depth but approximating the pattern. Ashira's eyes, large as dinner plates and the color of molten gold, studied him with what might have been pride. She had watched him grow from helpless infant to capable hunter. She had taught him which plants were poison and which could be eaten, where to find water in the dry season, how to read the thermal currents that told of approaching storms. They returned to the clan's territory together, Kai riding on Ashira's back as she flew. He had tried many times to make wings for himself, studying how Ashira caught the wind and glided between the peaks. Every attempt failed. His body was simply not made for flight. This had been a hard truth to accept, watching his siblings soar while he remained bound to the ground. But he had found other ways to move through their world, climbing paths too narrow for dragon wings, squeezing through caves too small for their massive bodies. The clan caves were busy when they arrived. 24 dragons of various sizes and colors made their homes in the interconnected caverns. Some were sleeping, curled around the warm volcanic vents that provided constant heat. Others were grooming each other, carefully removing parasites from scales. A few juveniles were practicing their fire, sending small bursts of flame into the air. Kai shared his kill with the clan, as was custom. Even though he had hunted it himself, the food belonged to everyone. This was dragon law, one of many traditions Kai had learned. But lately, he had begun to notice things about dragon culture that troubled him. The way disputes were always settled through combat. The way the clan never ventured beyond their traditional territory, even when prey became scarce. The way they had always done things simply because that was how things had always been done. A young dragon named Score approached Kai, smoke curling from his nostrils. Score was barely older than Kai in dragon years, which made him roughly the same age in terms of maturity. They had grown up together, learning to hunt in the same valleys. But where Kai asked questions, Score accepted everything as it was. This had led to arguments between them, conflicts that Ashira had to mediate. Score rumbled a challenge, gesturing toward the boundary markers that separated their clan's territory from the neighboring clan. There had been an incident yesterday. Dragons from the other clan had crossed into their hunting grounds, taking prey that should have belonged to Kai's family. According to dragon tradition, this insult could only be answered with combat. The strongest warriors from each clan would fight, and the winner would claim both territories. Kai understood the tradition, but he disagreed with it. He had been thinking about this problem all night, turning it over in his mind the way he shaped stone into tools. Fighting would mean injuries, possibly deaths. Even if his clan won, they would be weakened. The other clan would retreat but return when they were stronger. The cycle would continue forever, each side taking turns dominating the other. He tried to explain his idea to Score, using a mixture of dragon rumbles and gestures. What if they talked instead of fought? What if both clans shared the hunting grounds, taking turns so prey had time to replenish? What if they worked together instead of against each other? Score's response was immediate and aggressive. He reared back, spreading his wings to make himself look larger. Such ideas were weakness. Dragons fought. That was the way. To suggest otherwise was to dishonor their ancestors and traditions. Several other young dragons gathered, adding their own rumbles of agreement. Kai was strange, they said. He was not truly one of them. His ideas would make the clan soft. The argument escalated until Ashira intervened, her roar silencing everyone. She was the eldest and largest, her authority absolute. She listened to both sides, her golden eyes moving between Score and Kai. Then she did something unprecedented. She called a clan gathering, summoning every dragon to the central cavern. Kai stood before his family, feeling very small and very alone. Dozens of massive reptilian faces looked down at him, some curious, most skeptical. He spoke in the dragon tongue he had learned, explaining his idea. The neighboring clan was not truly their enemy. They were hungry, just like Kai's own family. Fighting would only ensure both clans remained hungry. But cooperation, sharing resources and working together would benefit everyone. The silence that followed was deafening. Dragons did not cooperate with other clans. They competed. They fought. That was the natural order, the way things had been for thousands of generations. To change this was to change everything they knew about themselves. Ashira rumbled thoughtfully. She looked at Kai, this strange, scaleless creature who had somehow survived 10 years on Drakmor. He had no fire, no wings, no claws. By all rights, he should have died that first day. But he had not died. He had adapted. He had found new ways to hunt, new ways to move, new ways to think. Perhaps his strange ideas deserved consideration. She announced her decision. They would try Kai's approach. She would contact the other clan's elder, not for combat but for discussion. If talking failed, they could always return to the old ways. But they would give peace a chance, something dragons had never done before. The clan rumbled their discomfort, but none challenged Ashira's authority. Kai felt relief wash over him, mixed with anxiety. He had convinced them to try, but now he had to prove his idea would work. If the meeting with the other clan failed, his family might never trust his strange human thinking again. That night, as Kai lay curled against Ashira's warm scales, he stared up through the cave opening at the stars above. Somewhere out there was the world he came from, a place he had no memory of. Did his birth family think like he did? Did they solve problems with words instead of violence? He would never know. This harsh volcanic world was his home now. These fire-breathing giants his only family. And he was about to change their culture forever, one impossible idea at a time. The sky above Drakmor flickered with lights that had no business being there. Kai noticed them first, small points of brightness that moved against the stars in ways stars never moved. He had been collecting water from a thermal spring when the lights appeared, forming patterns that seemed almost intentional. His heart quickened. Something in the deepest part of his memory stirred, recognition without understanding. Ashira sensed his distress and came to find him. She followed his gaze upward, her ancient eyes narrowing at the strange lights. In all her centuries, she had never seen such things. They were not natural. They did not belong to Drakmor's sky. She rumbled a warning, low and threatening, though she did not know what she threatened. The lights multiplied over the next hour, dozens becoming hundreds. They formed a grid pattern above the volcanic peaks, covering the sky like a net. Then, as the twin suns began to set, objects started descending through the atmosphere. They were smooth and white, shaped like seeds but large as dragons. They fell in controlled patterns, slowing before impact, landing in the valleys with precision that spoke of intelligence and purpose. The clan gathered on the highest peak, watching the invasion with growing alarm. These were not natural predators they could fight. These were something else entirely, something that came from beyond their world. Kai's stomach twisted with fear and something else. Familiarity. He had seen shapes like these before, in fragments of dreams he could never quite remember. One of the white objects landed nearby, close enough that the clan could see it clearly. It was perfectly smooth, without seams or markings, reflecting the volcanic landscape like a mirror. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the object split open, revealing its interior. What emerged was a machine, but unlike any tool Kai had made from stone and bone. This was all metal and moving parts, roughly the size of a juvenile dragon. It had multiple limbs ending in various attachments. Lights blinked along its surface. A single lens, like an eye, swiveled to focus on the watching dragons. The machine moved toward them, its legs adapting to the rocky terrain with unsettling ease. Ashira positioned herself in front of Kai, her protective instincts overriding her confusion. The rest of the clan spread out, forming a defensive circle. They did not understand what this thing was, but they understood threat. The machine stopped at a respectful distance. The lens focused on each dragon in turn, lingering longest on Kai. Something about that attention made his skin crawl. The machine was looking for something specific. Looking for him. He stepped out from behind Ashira, driven by curiosity stronger than fear. The machine reacted immediately. A beam of light shot from its lens, scanning Kai from head to foot. Information scrolled across the machine's surface in symbols that should have meant nothing to him. But somehow, some part of his brain recognized them. He saw numbers, patterns, a word that might have been a name or designation, Specimen 241. More machines emerged from other pods scattered across the valley, dozens of them, all moving with the same purposeful intelligence. They ignored the dragons entirely, their attention focused solely on Kai. He realized with growing horror that they had come for him. These machines, these invaders from the sky, had traveled across space to find one human boy on a forbidden world. The lead machine extended a limb toward Kai. The movement was not aggressive, but it was not friendly either. It was the gesture of someone claiming property. Ashira's roar shook the mountainside. She understood threat even if she did not understand machines. Her protective fury needed no translation. Fire erupted from her jaws, a torrent of flame hot enough to melt rock. It washed over the lead machine, engulfing it completely. When the flames cleared, the machine stood unchanged, its surface blackened but intact. It had been built to withstand dragonfire. Someone had known what they would face here. The machine moved again, faster this time, lunging for Kai. Ashira intercepted it, her claws striking the metal body hard enough to leave deep gouges. The machine stumbled but did not fall. Other dragons joined the attack, their combined fury descending on the invaders. Metal shrieked against claws. Fire turned night into day. The machines fought back with precision, their limbs striking at vulnerable points. Their movements coordinated in ways that suggested a single controlling intelligence. Kai ran. Not away from the battle, but toward the nearest crashed pod. If these machines came from there, perhaps he could find answers inside. Perhaps he could find a way to stop them. His human hands, so much smaller and weaker than dragon claws, pulled at the pod's opening. It resisted at first, then gave way with a hiss of escaping air. Inside was technology beyond his understanding, but also something familiar. Symbols covered every surface, the same ones from his fragmented dreams. A control panel blinked with lights. He pressed buttons at random, desperate to find something useful. Screens activated, showing images that made his breath catch. He saw himself as an infant, floating in a clear container filled with liquid. Saw beings with pale skin and large eyes examining him, making notes on devices he did not understand. Saw rows of other containers, other children, all marked with numbers and status reports. Most of those reports ended with a single word in red: terminated. The truth hit him like a physical blow. He had not fallen from the sky by accident. He had been thrown away, deemed worthless by creatures that performed experiments on stolen children. These machines were not coming to rescue him. They were coming to reclaim property they thought they had lost. Rage filled him, hot and fierce as dragon fire. These beings, these architects, had taken him from his birth family. They had performed their tests and then discarded him like trash. They had done the same to others, to children who never got the chance to crash land on a world of dragons. And now they wanted him back, as if 10 years of life meant nothing, as if Ashira and his clan family were irrelevant. He found what he was looking for: a communications array. His fingers flew across the controls, guided by instinct and desperate hope. He did not know how he knew which buttons to press, but something in his stolen infancy had left impressions. He activated the array, broadcasting on every frequency it could produce. Outside, the battle raged. Dragons fought with primal fury, but the machines kept coming. For every one destroyed, 2 more emerged from pods. The clan was being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Score fell, his wing damaged by a precise strike. Other dragons dragged him to safety, but their defensive circle was shrinking. Kai's voice emerged from the pod speakers, amplified and broadcast into space. He spoke in simple words, the only language he truly knew, a mixture of dragon rumbles and human speech that should have been meaningless. But the message itself needed no perfect translation. We are not animals. We are not experiments. We are not yours to take. This is my family. This is my home. Leave us alone. The machines paused. Their coordinated assault faltered for just a moment as the message reached whatever intelligence controlled them. In orbit above Drakmor, on the sleek architect research vessel that had dispatched the retrieval force, pale beings with large eyes studied the transmission with confusion. Specimen 241 had developed language, had formed attachments, had integrated with native life forms in ways their models said was impossible. The pause was brief, but it was enough. Ashira rallied the clan, leading a concentrated assault on the nearest cluster of machines. Dragonfire and claws combined with desperate fury, smashing through metal and circuitry. The machines adapted, but they had been designed for retrieval, not full warfare. The dragons were apex predators defending their family, and that made all the difference. More machines fell. The clan pressed their advantage, driving the invaders back toward their pods. Kai's message continued broadcasting, repeating over and over a declaration of identity and belonging that echoed into the void of space. Something else heard that message, 3 systems away. A Confederation patrol vessel detected the unusual transmission. The ship's communications officer, a human woman named Ryland, recognized her native language mixed with sounds she had never heard before. She brought it to her captain's attention, explaining that someone human was calling for help from a world marked forbidden on every chart. The captain faced an impossible decision. Council regulations forbade approaching Drakmor. The planet was off limits for reasons never fully explained in official records, but a human was there, possibly in danger, calling out in what sounded like genuine distress. Regulation said stay away. Conscience said investigate. Ryland argued passionately for intervention. The captain finally agreed, ordering their ship toward Drakmor at maximum speed. They would arrive in hours, possibly too late, possibly in time, but they were coming, bringing with them questions that would change everything for both humans and dragons. On Drakmor, the battle continued. Kai stood in the doorway of the pod, watching his family fight for him, watching dragons bleed to protect one small human who had no fire, no claws, no wings. He'd never felt more loved or more terrified. The machines were retreating now, falling back to their pods, but he knew this was not over. The architects would return with stronger forces. His message had been heard, but whether that would bring salvation or doom remained to be seen. The architect warship emerged from the clouds like a falling moon, massive and terrible in its silent approach. It dwarfed their research vessel still in orbit, designed not for study but for overwhelming force. The beings aboard had made their decision after reviewing the failed retrieval attempt. If the specimen could not be recovered peacefully, and if native life forms interfered, then more direct methods were authorized. Kai saw it coming from his position on the mountain peak. The ship was larger than anything he could have imagined, blotting out stars as it descended. His clan gathered around him, battered and exhausted from the previous battle. Several dragons nursed serious injuries. Score's wing was splinted with branches Kai had gathered, bound with the same sinew he used for his hunting spears. They had won the first fight, but everyone knew they could not win another. Ashira rumbled a question that needed no translation. Should they flee? The mountains had deep caves, places even machines might not reach. They could hide, wait for the invaders to leave. But Kai shook his head. He had seen the architect records. They did not give up. They would tear Drakmor apart to reclaim their lost specimen. Running would only delay the inevitable. The warship settled into a hover position above the valley. Weapons ports opened along its hull, revealing technology that made the retrieval machines look primitive. These were not designed to capture. These were designed to destroy. A single pulse could level the entire mountain range. Kai understood this instinctively, the same way he understood the symbols in the pod. Some knowledge from his stolen infancy remained, buried deep but accessible when needed. A new sound cut through the volcanic wind. Different engines, smaller and faster. Kai turned to see another ship dropping through the atmosphere. This one bearing markings he somehow recognized. The Confederation, the beings who claimed to maintain order among the stars, who made rules about which worlds could be approached and which must remain forbidden. This ship was tiny compared to the architect warship, but it moved with confidence, positioning itself between the weapon-laden giant and the dragons below. Inside the Confederation vessel, Captain Ryland stood on her command deck, fully aware she was violating a dozen regulations. Her crew worked frantically at their stations, trying to establish communication with both the architect warship and the source of the strange transmission they had followed here. Her first officer, a reptilian being from a species that had joined the Confederation centuries ago, advised caution. They were outgunned and operating outside legal jurisdiction. Ryland ignored the advice. She had heard the message, heard the fear and defiance in that young voice, mixing human words with sounds no human throat should make. Someone from her species was down there, had been down there for years based on the linguistic analysis. Council regulations be damned. She was not leaving a human to face architect weapons alone. She opened a channel to the architect warship, her words formal but firm. This world was under Confederation protection. She lied smoothly. Any hostile action would be considered an act of war. She demanded to know the architect's business here, and their authorization for military presence in neutral space. The architect response came cold and emotionless through her translator. They were retrieving stolen property, research specimens taken by pirates years ago. This world was marked forbidden by the Council itself, making Confederation claims of protection invalid. They had every legal right to recover what belonged to them. Ryland's blood went cold. Stolen property, specimens. She had seen the reports of missing humans in this sector, children taken during raids on remote colonies. The Council had never found the perpetrators. Now she understood why. The architects had been protected by their own research protocols, hidden behind laws that valued scientific advancement over individual lives. On the ground, Kai watched the two ships face each other in the sky. He did not understand all of what was happening, but he grasped the essential truth. Someone had come in response to his message. Someone was trying to help. He activated the communications array again, this time targeting the Confederation vessel specifically. His voice, when it came through Ryland's speakers, made her entire crew stop their work. It was human, definitely human, but wrong somehow. The accent was strange, the rhythm unusual. and mixed within the human speech were sounds that should not come from a human throat. Rumbles, roars, dragon language. Kai told his story in simple words. He explained waking in a cave of fire breathers, growing up learning to hunt without claws, teaching himself to make tools because his body was weak, finding a family among creatures that should have eaten him. He spoke of Ashira, who had saved him when she could have left him to die, of Score, who argued with him but fought beside him, of 10 years of life on a world that should have killed him, but instead gave him everything that mattered. Then he told Ryland about the pod, about the records he found inside, about containers of children marked terminated, about pale beings with large eyes who measured and tested and discarded living children like failed experiments. His voice broke with rage and grief for siblings he never met, for lives ended before they truly began. Ryland's hands tightened on her command chair. She had suspected human trafficking. She had not imagined anything this systematic, this cold. The architects on their warship were not coming to rescue anyone. They were coming to reclaim evidence of crimes that would shatter their species' reputation across the galaxy. She made a decision that would end her career or start a war. She transmitted everything Kai had said to the Confederation Council directly, bypassing all normal channels. She included her ship's recordings, her location, the presence of the Architect warship. She made it impossible for the Council to ignore or bury what was happening on this forbidden world. The Architects detected her transmission. Their response was immediate. Weapons charged, targeting both the Confederation vessel and the mountains below. They would destroy the evidence, kill the specimen, eliminate the witnesses. Then they would claim the Confederation ship had fired first, that they acted in self-defense. Kai felt the energy building in the air, that same wrongness that had preceded the retrieval machines. He looked at Ashira, at his family gathered around him. He had brought this danger to them. His presence on Drakmor had painted a target on everyone he loved. For one desperate moment, he considered surrendering, walking toward the Architect's ship with his hands raised, offering himself in exchange for his family's safety. Ashira's massive head lowered to his level. Her golden eyes met his and her rumble was firm. No surrender. No sacrifice. They were family. They protected each other. That was the dragon way. And Kai was dragon now, regardless of what form his body took. The Architect weapons reached full charge. Ryland's ship prepared to fire, knowing they could not win but refusing to run. Kai stood with his family, small and scaleless among giants, ready to face whatever came next. Then space itself seemed to tear open. More ships dropped from faster-than-light travel, dozens of them bearing Confederation military markings. The Council had received Ryland's transmission. They had reviewed the evidence, and they had responded with a force that made the Architect warship look suddenly small and vulnerable. The lead Confederation Dreadnought's commander opened a channel to all vessels. Her words were cold and absolute. The Architects would stand down immediately. Their warship would be boarded and searched. Any resistance would be met with overwhelming force. This world, previously forbidden, was now under formal Confederation protection pending investigation of crimes against sapient beings. The Architect warship's weapons powered down. They had no choice. Even their advanced technology could not fight an entire battle group. They had been caught, their crimes exposed, their leverage gone. Slowly, reluctantly, they began retreat protocols. Kai collapsed to his knees, relief washing over him so intensely it felt like physical pain. Ashira wrapped her wing around him, sheltering him as she had when he was an infant. The rest of the clan pressed close, forming a protective circle that was no longer needed but felt right anyway. Ryland's ship descended, landing in the valley away from the Dragon clan to avoid startling them. She emerged from the airlock in a protective suit, her human features visible through the clear helmet. She moved slowly, aware that massive predators watched her every step. Kai walked toward her on shaking legs, leaving his family behind for the first time in 10 years. He stopped halfway between the ship and the dragons, standing alone in that space between two worlds. When he spoke, his voice carried to both sides. He thanked Ryland for coming, for believing his message, for risking everything to help strangers on a forbidden world. But he also told her he would not leave. Drakmor was his home. The dragons were his family. Whatever happened next, whatever investigations or legal proceedings followed, he would face them here, with his people. Ryland studied this strange human boy who moved like a predator and spoke with a dragon's authority. She saw the scars on his darkened skin, the lean muscle built from surviving impossible conditions, the absolute certainty in his eyes. This was not a victim waiting for rescue. This was someone who had already saved himself, in ways the Confederation could never have managed. She removed her helmet, breathing Drakmore's harsh air, showing respect through vulnerability. She told Kai that he had choices now. He could leave, return to human space, find what remained of his birth family if they still lived. Or he could stay. But staying meant becoming something unprecedented, a bridge between species, an ambassador for people who had never needed ambassadors before. Kai looked back at Ashira, at his silver-scaled mother watching from the mountain. He looked at the Confederation ships overhead, at the human woman offering him connection to a species he barely remembered. He was both and neither, human and dragon-raised, changed by circumstances beyond his control into something new. His answer, when it came, surprised no one who truly understood what he had become. He would be the bridge. He would speak for his family to the stars and for the stars to his family. He would make sure no other child, human or otherwise, suffered what he had suffered. And he would do it all from here, from the volcanic peaks and fire-warmed caves of the only home he had ever known. 14 days after the Architect warship retreated, Kai stood inside a Confederation medical bay, surrounded by machines that hummed and blinked with purposes he barely understood. Ryland had convinced him to submit to a full examination, arguing that understanding his physiology would help protect him in the future. The doctors were fascinated by what they found. His bones had grown denser than normal human bones adapted to Drakmore's higher gravity. His skin had developed additional layers to handle the extreme temperature variations. His lungs processed the sulfur-heavy air with an efficiency that should have been impossible, but the most remarkable changes were not physical. Brain scans showed unusual neural pathways, connections that formed from learning dragon language during critical developmental years. His mind had literally rewired itself to process sounds and concepts no human brain was designed to handle. He was still human, the doctors assured him, but humanity shaped by an alien world into something unique. The examinations completed, Kai returned to Drakmore's surface where Ashira waited. She had been anxious during his absence, pacing the landing zone the Confederation had established near the clan caves. Her relief at his return came out as a roar that echoed across 3 valleys. Several Confederation personnel jumped at the sound, reaching for weapons they had been ordered not to carry in the dragon's presence. Kai rumbled back, assuring her he was fine, that the Sky Dwellers had only looked, not harmed. Ashira lowered her massive head, allowing him to press his forehead against her scales in the gesture of affection they had developed over years. To the watching Confederation observers, the scene was impossible. Apex predators did not form emotional bonds with prey species, yet here was proof that all their scientific assumptions were incomplete. Ryland approached carefully, having learned to announce her presence with small sounds that would not startle the dragons. She carried a datapad filled with information that would change Kai's life whether he wanted it changed or not. The Confederation Council had made their decision regarding Drakmore and its unusual inhabitants. The dragons were recognized as a protected species, their intelligence officially acknowledged. Drakmore's forbidden status was revoked, replaced with a new classification, emerging civilization. No mining, no colonization, no interference beyond the small research outpost the Council planned to establish. The world belonged to the dragons now, legally and formally. They would be left alone to develop at their own pace. But there was a complication, as Ryland gently explained. The Council wanted someone to serve as intermediary between dragon culture and the greater galactic community. Someone who understood both sides, who could translate not just language but meaning, intention, context. They wanted Kai to be that bridge, but being a bridge meant standing in the middle, never fully belonging to either side. Kai listened to the terms. 6 months each year spent aboard Confederation stations, learning human culture, science, diplomacy, languages. 6 months on Drakmore, living with his clan, teaching them what he learned, helping them navigate this new reality where they were no longer alone in the universe. He would be given full citizenship in the Confederation, protections and rights equal to any being. But he would also be watched constantly, studied, analyzed as the first human raised by non-humanoids. The weight of the decision pressed on him. Accept, and he could help shape how dragons were treated by the galaxy. Refuse, and the Confederation would send someone else, someone who did not understand that dragons were more than apex predators, that they had culture and art and philosophy expressed in ways outsiders rarely recognized. Ashira rumbled a question. What did Kai want? Not what others wanted from him, but what his heart chose. It was the same question she had asked when he was 7 years old, crying because he could not fly like his siblings. Then as now, she made clear that she would support whatever answer he gave. Kai looked out across the volcanic landscape that had been his whole world. He looked at the Confederation personnel setting up their outpost, bringing with them technology and knowledge from 1,000 worlds. He looked at Ashira, at Score recovering nearby with his wing healing slowly, at the dozen other dragons who had fought machines to protect one small human who should have been nothing to them. His answer came from a place deeper than thought. Yes, he would serve as bridge. Yes, he would learn the ways of the stars, but not because the council demanded it, because his family deserved someone who would fight for them the way they fought for him, because children in containers marked terminated deserved justice, because bridges connected, and connection was what made survival into something worth calling life. The first months aboard the Confederation station proved harder than any hunt on Drakmor. Kai had grown up in caves and volcanic valleys, under open skies where the only walls were stone. The station was all metal corridors and recycled air. Thousands of beings from hundreds of species crowded together in artificial gravity. The noise overwhelmed him. The smells confused his hunting instincts. He found himself crouching in corners, feeling trapped in ways he never had on Drakmor's harshest days. Ryland became his guide through this strange new world. She taught him to read and write in standard Confederation language, showed him how to use datapads and communication devices, explained the complex web of laws and treaties that governed interactions between species. It was like learning to hunt all over again, but instead of tracking prey through thermal vents, he was tracking meaning through layers of diplomacy and politics. The other humans on the station did not know what to make of him. He looked human but moved like something else. His social skills were strange, developed from dragon culture where dominance and submission were communicated through posture and sound volume. He had trouble with personal space, standing too close or too far. His humor, shaped by dragon perspective, often fell flat or confused people. But he learned. Humans were adaptable, and Kai had spent his whole life adapting. He learned to modulate his voice to human norms, to shake hands instead of pressing foreheads, to smile instead of showing teeth. He learned the difference between professional distance and friendship, between formal speech and casual conversation. It was exhausting, performing humanity he barely remembered, but necessary. The hardest part was learning about Earth. Ryland showed him videos of the planet he supposedly came from, cities of glass and metal, oceans that stretched beyond sight, forests that held no volcanic heat. She showed him records of human history, art, music, literature. All of it should have felt familiar, should have stirred some deep racial memory. Instead, it felt alien, more alien than Dragon Clan caves ever had. She also showed him the records of the architect investigation. 23 children confirmed taken over a 5-year period. Kai was one of only 3 survivors found. The others had been recovered from different illegal research stations, their minds broken by experiments and isolation. They would need years of therapy, might never fully recover. The architects responsible were facing trial, their entire species' reputation damaged by the revelations. Kai attended one of the trials via video link. He sat in a small room aboard the station and watched pale beings with large eyes answer questions about procurement methods and test protocols. They showed no remorse, only frustration at being caught. To them, the children had been specimens, not people. The concept of emotional attachment was irrelevant to their research goals. He left the trial feed before it concluded, feeling sick in ways that had nothing to do with his body. Ashira had found him as a crying infant and chosen to protect him. The architects had examined him as a test subject and chosen to dispose of him. The difference between those choices was the difference between love and indifference, between seeing a person and seeing only data. When his 6 months in space ended, Kai returned to Drakmor with relief so profound it brought tears to his eyes. Ashira was waiting at the designated landing zone along with most of the clan. They had questions. So many questions about the stars and the beings who lived among them. Kai spent weeks sharing stories, teaching new words, explaining concepts like money and government and technology. The clan absorbed this information in their own way. They were not interested in building cities or flying between stars. But they wanted to understand the universe they had suddenly become part of. They wanted to know if other worlds had their own clans, their own territories, their own traditions. Kai became not just translator but teacher, shaping how dragons would perceive the greater galaxy. Score approached him one evening, his wing fully healed now. The young dragon who had once called Kai's ideas weakness, now asked carefully phrased questions about Confederation law. Could dragons own territory legally? Could they trade with other species? Could they refuse visitors they did not want? Kai answered each question patiently, pleased that his brother was thinking beyond simple dominance and submission. But the most significant change came from Ashira. The ancient dragon had spent months thinking about what Kai's return meant, about the knowledge he brought from the stars. She called a gathering of nearby clans, something unprecedented in dragon history. 5 clans sent representatives, all curious about the strange developments on Drakmor. Ashira spoke with authority granted by age and respect. She explained about the Sky Dwellers, about the recognition of dragon intelligence, about the protections and dangers this new reality brought. Then she proposed something revolutionary. The clans should form a council, not to fight over territory, but to speak with one voice when dealing with beings from the stars. They needed organization, cooperation, unity. The other clan elders argued, as Kai knew they would. Dragons did not unify. They competed. But Ashira countered with simple truth. The universe was full of species who did unify, who worked together, who were stronger for their cooperation. If dragons wanted to remain free on their own world, they needed to present a united front to the galaxy. The debate lasted 3 days. Kai served as mediator, translating concepts and helping dragons understand perspectives beyond their traditional thinking. In the end, the council was formed, the first dragon governing body in their species' million-year history. Ashira was elected as first speaker, charged with representing all dragons in dealings with the Confederation. Kai watched his mother take on this new role with pride and sadness. He had changed everything by falling from the sky as an infant, had brought revolution to a culture that valued tradition above all else. He did not know if this was good or bad, only that it was necessary. The galaxy had found Drakmor. The dragons had to choose, adapt or be swept aside by forces beyond their control. As the twin sun set on his first month back home, Kai sat at the edge of a cliff with Ashira beside him. A human shuttle was scheduled to arrive tomorrow, bringing Ryland for a diplomatic visit, the first official contact between the Confederation and the new Dragon Council. Kai would stand between them, translating words and worlds belonging fully to neither but essential to both. Ashira rumbled a question that had no easy answer. Was Kai happy with the path his life had taken? Would he change anything if he could? He thought about containers of children marked terminated, about machines that came to reclaim lost property, about the choice between dying alone in a crashed pod or being raised by fire-breathing giants who taught him that family was stronger than biology. His answer was simple and true. He would change nothing. Every impossible moment, every adaptation, every bridge he built between species had made him who he was. Human and dragon, neither and both, and somehow improbably exactly what this universe needed. 5 years had reshaped Drakmor in ways no one could have predicted when Kai first broadcast his desperate message into space. The Confederation research outpost had grown from temporary structures into a permanent facility, housing scientists who studied dragon culture with reverence rather than clinical detachment. Trade routes now included Drakmor on their maps, though few merchant ships dared land on a world of fire-breathing apex predators. The Dragon Council met quarterly, their debates broadcast to xenoanthropology departments across the galaxy. Kai stood before a full-length mirror in his quarters aboard the Confederation diplomatic vessel, adjusting formal clothing that still felt strange against his skin. He was 20 years old now, his body fully grown into the lean, scarred frame of someone shaped by harsh worlds. His face carried marks from Drakmor's sun and wind, making him look older than his years. But his eyes held something that medical scans could never capture. The golden flicker of dragon fire reflected in human irises, a trick of memory and belonging that went deeper than genetics. Today's gathering was unprecedented. The Confederation Council had invited Ashira to address them directly, the first time a non-humanoid species would speak before the full assembly. Kai would serve as translator, but more importantly as proof that communication between radically different species was possible. His existence argued for patience, for trying to understand rather than assuming incomprehension. The journey from Drakmor had taken 3 weeks, Ashira traveling in a specially modified cargo vessel large enough to accommodate her bulk. She had been anxious during the trip, her first time leaving her homeworld. Kai had stayed with her throughout, providing comfort the way she once comforted him in the volcanic caves of his infancy. The reversal was not lost on either of them. Now they waited in an antechamber outside the council hall, surrounded by diplomatic staff who eyed Ashira with barely concealed nervousness. She was massive even by dragon standards, her silver scales catching the artificial light in ways that made her seem to shimmer. Her presence dominated the space, a reminder that predators could be people, that danger and intelligence were not mutually exclusive. Ryland appeared through the crowd, wearing the formal uniform of a Confederation captain. Her career had flourished after the Drakmor incident. She was now the head of the newly formed First Contact Division, charged with handling introductions to emerging civilizations. Her first major success had been establishing protocols that prevented the disasters of forced contact, that gave new species time and space to develop on their own terms. She briefed Kai on the political situation inside the council chamber. Support for dragon recognition was strong but not universal. Several species objected to granting full rights to beings who still settled disputes through combat, who had no written language, who rejected most technology as unnecessary. There were concerns about setting precedent, about opening doors that might be hard to close. If dragons could join the Confederation without meeting traditional requirements, what about other species currently classified as pre-contact? Kai listened, understanding the complexity but refusing to be swayed by it. Dragons were not pre-contact anymore. They had been contacted violently and against their will when retrieval machines invaded their world. The Confederation could either recognize that reality and work with it, or pretend nothing had changed and watch dragons develop without guidance into potential adversaries instead of allies. The chamber doors opened. Kai walked forward with Ashira, their steps synchronized from years of moving together. The council hall was circular, designed to give no species visual advantage over others. Representatives from 300 worlds filled the seats, their forms ranging from humanoid to incomprehensible. Some breathed oxygen, others methane. Some saw light, others sound. Yet all had achieved spaceflight. All had developed civilizations complex enough to navigate galactic politics. Ashira stopped at the center speaking platform, designed for beings much smaller than her. She lowered her head to the microphone level, her golden eyes scanning the assembly without fear. Kai stood beside her, one hand resting on her foreleg, drawing strength from the contact. The council speaker, a being from a species resembling crystalline trees, opened the session. The translator devices worn by all attendees flickered as they processed the speaker's language into hundreds of others. The question posed to Ashira was simple but profound. Why should dragons be recognized as a full member species when they met so few of the traditional criteria? Ashira's response came as a rumble that the translators struggled to process. Kai supplemented, adding the context and nuance that pure language could not carry. She spoke of dragon history, millions of years of survival on one of the galaxy's harshest worlds. She described their culture, not written but remembered, passed through generations in songs that sounded like thunder. She explained their values: strength, loyalty, territory, family. These were not human values, perhaps not values the council members shared, but they were values nonetheless. Then she spoke of change, and here Kai's translation became crucial. Dragons had lived unchanged for eons because change seemed unnecessary. They were apex predators, perfectly adapted to their environment. But the universe had come to them anyway, bringing technology and conflict and questions they had never thought to ask. They could have rejected it all, killed the strange, scaleless creature that fell from the sky and returned to their old ways. Instead, they chose curiosity. They chose to protect something weak and alien. That choice had led them here, to this moment, speaking before species they once never imagined existed. A representative from a militant species challenged the response. Dragons were dangerous, aggressive, territorial. They fought among themselves constantly. How could such beings be trusted in the greater community? What would stop them from viewing other species as prey or competitors? Kai answered this one himself, his voice carrying the authority of lived experience. Dragons fought, yes, but humans fought too. Every species in this chamber had conflicts, wars, territorial disputes. Dragons were honest about their aggression, made it ritual and formal. What made them different from any other species learning to move beyond violence toward cooperation? He told them about score, about arguments settled with words now instead of fire, about the clan gatherings where disputes were mediated rather than fought, about young dragons learning that there were multiple ways to show strength, and that sometimes the strongest choice was restraint. Change was not instant for any species. Why should dragons be held to standards that other Confederation members had taken centuries to achieve? The debate continued for hours. Representatives questioned, argued, expressed concerns both valid and prejudiced. Through it all, Ashira remained calm, her presence alone arguing her case. She was intelligent, articulate through Kai's translation, and fundamentally reasonable despite her fearsome appearance. The contrast between how she looked and how she spoke forced council members to confront their own assumptions about what intelligence meant. During a break, Kai found himself surrounded by curious representatives who had never seen a human raised by non-humanoids. They asked questions that ranged from scientific to personal, trying to understand how such a thing was possible. He explained about developmental windows, about how young minds adapted to their environment. He had learned dragon language during the years when human brains were most flexible, creating neural pathways that could not be formed in adulthood. But more than biology, he emphasized choice. Ashira had chosen to save him. His clan had chosen to accept him. He had chosen to serve as bridge between worlds. Choice was what made them all people, regardless of what bodies they wore or what worlds they called home. The final vote came as the station's lights dimmed to simulate evening, a nod to the many species who operated on circadian rhythms. The council speaker called for decision. Would Drakmor and its dragon inhabitants be recognized as an emerging member species, granted protection and representation while developing toward full membership? The vote was not unanimous. Some species abstained, others voted against, citing concerns about precedent and traditional requirements, but the majority supported recognition. Dragons would have a voice in Confederation affairs. Drakmor would be protected from exploitation, and Kai would continue serving as ambassador, now with official authority to negotiate treaties and represent dragon interests. Ashira rumbled her gratitude, a sound that needed no translation. Kai felt tears on his face, surprising himself with the strength of his emotion. This was not just recognition for dragons. It was validation of everything he had become, proof that the bridge he built between species was strong enough to bear weight. Rylan met them outside the chamber, her smile wide and genuine. She had fought hard behind the scenes for this outcome, calling in favors and making arguments that went beyond policy into morality. The victory was shared among many. But it started with one human captain who heard a desperate message and chose to investigate rather than ignore. The celebration that night brought together beings from across the galaxy. Kai moved through the crowd, translating for Ashira, introducing her to species she found fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. She met beings who lived in liquid, who communicated through color changes, who existed partially in dimensions she could not perceive. The universe was larger and stranger than either of them had imagined during those first years, when Kai was learning to survive on volcanic plains. Late in the evening, Kai found a quiet observation deck where he could see the stars without the press of the crowd. Ashira joined him, her bulk somehow fitting into the space that should have been too small. They stood together in comfortable silence, looking out at the infinite darkness dotted with lights that represented worlds and peoples and possibilities. Ashira rumbled a question, her tone thoughtful. Did Kai ever wish he had grown up human, among his own kind, living the life he would have had if the architects had never taken him? It was a question she had asked variations of over the years, always searching for regret she feared to find. Kai's answer had evolved over time, becoming more certain with each passing year. No, he would not change his past. The children marked terminated in those containers never got to make that choice. They were gone, erased by beings who saw life as data, but he survived. Not because he was strong or special, but because he fell in the right place at the right moment. Because a silver-scaled dragon chose mercy over indifference. Everything he was came from that choice. His ability to see beyond species boundaries, to find common ground between beings who seemed incompatible, to argue for patience and understanding instead of fear. The galaxy needed more of that, not less. It needed bridges built by people who belonged nowhere and everywhere, who could speak the languages of both heart and mind. Ashira wrapped her wing around him, the gesture they had shared since his infancy. Despite his growth, despite his years among the stars learning to be human, he still fit in that space against her side, still felt safest surrounded by scales that radiated warmth like a volcanic vent. Tomorrow they would begin the journey back to Drakmor. Kai would spend another 6 months with his clan, teaching and learning, helping dragons navigate their new reality as recognized members of galactic society. Then he would return to the stars for another round of diplomacy and translation. The pattern would continue for years, maybe decades. He would split his life between worlds, never fully belonging to either, always standing in the space between. But standing between was not the same as standing alone. He had family on Drakmor, dragons who fought machines to protect him. He had friends among the stars, humans and others who saw past his unusual upbringing to the person he had become. He had purpose, serving as proof that connection was possible even across impossible divides. The stars above held thousands of species, millions of worlds, infinite possibilities for both understanding and conflict. Somewhere in that vastness were other children like he had been, lost and alone, waiting for someone to choose mercy. He could not save them all, but he could build frameworks that made mercy more likely, that encouraged species to see past surface differences to the sapience beneath. Kai leaned against Ashira, feeling her breath rise and fall, hearing the low rumble she made when content. This was home, regardless of what planet they stood on. Home was not a place. It was the choice to protect, to love, to bridge impossible distances with nothing but stubborn refusal to accept that some gaps could not be crossed. He was human, raised by dragons, serving as voice for both in a galaxy that needed voices like his. He was the boy who fell from the sky and learned to breathe fire through words instead of flame. He was the bridge between worlds who proved that the strongest bonds were forged not in similarity, but in the brave, impossible choice to understand, to protect, and to love across all differences, and he was home.